Adoption and expensive, two words that do not always belong together. There are 120,000 children in the United States that are waiting for a forever family, and adopting through this option is extremely affordable. I'm Marcy Bursack, an adoptive mom of a sibling pair, and also the author of The Forgotten Adoption Option. Twice monthly, I will interview people like adoptive parents and adopted children who have been touched by foster care adoption. My goal is to find more forever families and increase awareness about foster care adoption, because if it were you or me, we would want someone to do this for us.
Welcome to the Forgotten Adoption Option podcast. In this episode, I'm interviewing a fellow author and adoptive mom. Hi, Sandra.
Hey, Marcy.
This is so fun. Sandra is the mother of 8 children in total, 5 through adoption. She hosts the Orphans No More podcast and runs a nonprofit called Justice for Orphans. We initially got introduced through a mutual friend here, and then got reconnected just a few months ago through another mutual author friend. I'm so excited to dive more into Sandra's heart. As I was telling her before we started recording, it's just so neat to see the different flavors and shapes of how family is formed. And you have kind of a larger size of a family. So I think it's going to be really neat to let folks peek in. So Sandra, let's start with that. So you're a mom of 8, 5, which you adopted. So it's more than 50%. What ages were your children when you adopted them? And did you adopt any of them through foster care?
Well, thanks again, Marcy, for having me on. There's a lot. We had 3 biological when we adopted. We actually got custody first of an 8-year-old girl who was a relative. So that would be a kinship adoption. We had custody of her first. It wasn't through foster care, but had we not taken her into our home, she would have gone into foster care. She was like a third cousin of mine, and she lived with us for about three years or so. And then we formally adopted her. And then about that time, the Lord stirred our hearts toward international adoption. So 4 of our kiddos are siblings adopted from Ukraine. We got 3 of them first. And at the time they came, they were ages 9, 7, and 3. And right before I left Ukraine with them, we discovered there was a 4th sibling. He was about 14 months old at the time, and but unavailable. He was in the orphanage, but no paperwork. He was not available. Just go home with our 3, wait and see what the Lord would do with all of that. And then a few years later, the door opened for us to bring him home. And when we brought him home, he was 5.
Wow. So you already had at that time 4 or 3, and then you went and adopt. So like, you're just bringing in a sibling group. You're just open
Yeah.
to whatever that might happen. It's interesting because you pointed out kinship, because I point this out in my book, The Forgotten Adoption Option, as well, because we actually my husband and I sat in our foster care licensing classes next to a couple that was also adopting a little girl that was like a friend of a relative, like just something that was like kind of connected to them. And I know for yours, you talk about it in your book, Orphans No More. You kind of lay out kind of the family dynamics that kind of led to that opportunity. So I encourage people to get your book and read more about what you went through and how that experience impacted you. Because did you all end up then, Sandra, going through the state? Like, how did you finalize your kinship adoption?
We hired an attorney, and which we had to have him kind of throughout the process, because she had been in the custody of her grandmother, who was elderly and physically not well and mentally not well. So we had a few years where she was just really, really made life difficult for everybody. But so we had an attorney through that process. And then we decided, when grandma passed away and our daughter actually asked to be adopted, we just went through that process. We had a home study done, but we didn't go through the state. It was more of kind of like a private adoption.
Sure. So it was a relative.
Yes.
Which is so interesting. So what then, you're a mom, you've got biological kids. What led you and your significant other, what led you guys to pursue adoption?
Well, I kind of joke that the Lord sort of led us through the back door. It was not on our radar at all. We had our 3 kids. We were, good to go. I was a stay-at-home mom and just very happy to do that. But then the Lord showed us this little girl. We had been helping her grandmother and her, because our daughter, Melissa, the kinship adoption, her mom had passed away. She had cancer and she passed away when Melissa was 5. And then there was this 3 tumultuous years with her grandmother. And as we were reaching out to help them together, we recognized this little girl was in a really, it was just, of course, God will do whatever you want us to do. And the story just unfolded. She came to live with us. We got custody and eventually adopted her. And really our faith, just wanting to do whatever God wanted us to do, and walk out in obedience, what he calls us to do. And he began to really heavily lay adoption on my heart again after Melissa was formally adopted. And we just, the church we attended, our pastor had adopted a sibling group from Ukraine. His biological daughter was a missionary over there. Our church was taking mission trips every year over to Ukraine, pointing us in that direction. But it was just that sensitivity to the Holy Spirit leading us to open our home and say yes to children who needed a family.
Wow. You kind of just said yes, is what it sounds
Yeah,
like.
you just say yes. Yep. That I just opening the door, just step through the door, say yes, and trust him for what's on the other side.
Sandra, you started a nonprofit in 2011 called Justice for Orphans. And then out of that, in 2012, you started this weekly radio program. What on earth? Which, I mean, you're like totally just living your life in whatever direction you're being called to. But what inspired you to start devoting yourself to do this kind of work? And what are you hoping results as an effect of all the things you're doing?
So after we had adopted all of our kids, we had everybody home. My pastor's wife and I decided to do an Orphan Sunday service at our church. Orphan Sunday is every November. It's an initiative of Christian Alliance for Orphans. And we just, we kind of approached the pastor, and of course he said yes, because he's an adopted dad. And he basically gave us the service. So in preparing for that service, I was searching the scriptures and researching orphan and foster care statistics, and was just wrecked because, like I said earlier, we adopted because it was what we felt God called us to do. And we said yes. I didn't have this big picture. I didn't know there was a national foster care crisis. I didn't know there was 400,000 children in foster care. I didn't know there was 153 million orphans around the world. But once I knew that, and I realized, if me as an adoptive mom, I didn't know that, then the other people sitting next to me in church, they don't know that. So who's going to tell them? Who's going to awaken the church? So we did our first Orphan Sunday service, and that led to us going to a conference, a CAFO summit for orphans. And we hosted an orphan conference at our church, invited other churches to come and learn more about adoption and foster care. And it just really grew out of that, out of just a passion to, rally the church, Big C Church, for the cause of the orphan and kids in foster care. So it was birthed, Justice for Orphans was birthed just through that very first Orphan Sunday that we did. And then I got invited to be on a local Christian station on a program, and which I tried desperately to get out of because I was terrified of being on the radio. It was 1 hour live radio, and I was the only guest. I was dying. I kept trying to get out of it. And then finally I realized the Lord was tapping me on the shoulder, like, hello, I'm opening this door, so you need to go through. So I did, thinking I'll just do it. God will help me. I'll survive. I won't have to do it ever again. And then I got invited back on that show, a few months later. And then the radio station approached me and said, "Hey, we think you should have your own radio program where you talk about this adoption and foster care and orphan stuff every week. And you can interview your own guests and do whatever you want to do." And I'm like, "Are you for real?" Because I'm a stay-at-home homeschooling mom with 8 kids. I have no experience with radio or broadcasting or anything. But yet again, we had just established Justice for Orphans as our nonprofit, and our mission was to rally the church for the cause of the fatherless. And we saw right away, what better opportunity to rally the church than be every week on Christian radio. So, with much fear and trepidation and just trusting the Lord to show up, we stepped into that space of radio. And Orphans No More was originally a radio program that was broadcast weekly locally. When podcasts kind of became real popular, we started to repackage each radio episode as a podcast. And then a few years ago, the station sold its air to a music station, and everybody who had radio programs, talk shows, had to find other venues anyway. But we just were getting such, great traction with the podcast that we're just podcast now.
Which I think is so much why you and I have a synergy, because it's like we're trying to help people know what we learned, because it's not common knowledge to know these things. And kind of rewinding early in that answer you said about Orphan Sunday. And it's interesting, they're celebrating their 20th anniversary this year. And it's the first Sunday in November. I'm so excited. And I actually was talking to some of the leaders of my church about it. And I go to a pretty large church, and it was interesting. They said, "Marcy, we've never heard of this." Mm-hmm. And I thought, well, that's interesting, because the church I was at before my husband and I adopted our kids, we learned about how to adopt through foster care because the church did like an Orphan Sunday weekend expo. And so you're completely right that, like, if we can get the word out, we can help people become aware and be invited to also go and help the fatherless. I think that's beautiful.
Yeah.
I think that's so beautiful. Okay, so what I think is really interesting about your story, Sandra, is you've done a whole lot of research in different areas. You're like an expert on so many different topics about what impacts kiddos that are adopted. And so I'm going to swivel over to your book, Orphans No More. If anyone's following along, I'm on page 129. And this caught my attention. You had said the title of the chapter is "We Didn't Know What We Didn't Know," which is so true in parenting in general, right? And you say, "My only regret, not knowing how to parent a child with trauma history. It takes a different set of parenting tools to raise kids from hard places. Using the wrong tools can cause additional harm. Love is necessary. Unconditional love is vital. But love is not enough." Can you kind of expand on that for our readers? Because you have such an interesting story. You've got bio kids and adoptive kids, and you understand kind of both sides of how that works. So why is love not enough?
Yeah. So we had 3 bio kids, and we felt like, we were doing pretty well. They were, I think they were ages, I want to say 9 down to 4 when our daughter, Melissa, first came to live with us. And we felt like, hey, we're good parents. This is working. We're doing well here. And we also we welcomed this little girl into our family, and we're going to treat her just like our biological kids. She's going to have all the same opportunities and privileges and, all of the things. We're going to treat her the same way. Also,
you're going to be fair. Yeah.
Yeah, we're going to be fair. Like, she's going to just, but we're also going to have the same expectations and the same disciplines and the same consequences and all of that. And what we found was, this little girl had come in, and we didn't know anything. And part of it was because we didn't take foster parenting classes. She just came to live with us after a judge said, "You're a relative, why don't you take her?" And we were like, okay. And boom, she was at our house the next afternoon. And while we had visited with her periodically with her grandmother at different times, it was quite different than now we're parenting her, we're raising her. And she had trauma, and we knew her mom had died, and we knew grandma had never really tended to that loss. The little girl had never had any counseling. So the first thing that we did do was get her some Christian counseling. But we did not have the parenting skills to understand the impact of trauma on a child, on their development, on their brain. We didn't understand the behavior. So we very early on dealing with a child that seemed oppositional. She seemed defiant in some ways. She seemed, she didn't outright, like, very interesting. She didn't outright, tell us, no, I'm not going to clean my room, or no, I'm not going to take a bath, or no, I'm not going to do my homework, but then never like do those things. So then I spent my life, like I spent, it seemed like I spent years issuing consequences. That was like all I ever did was issue consequences, but she never learned from consequences. And it really wasn't until more recently, and now she's 30. It wasn't until more recently, getting some in-depth training on fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, did I come to understand that children with a developmental disability such as FASD, they do not learn from consequences at all. There's just not a connection there to cause and effect. And so I issued consequences, and those consequences really drove a wedge between us. Like, I loved this child, and I prayed fervently for years that the Lord would help me to love her the way he loves her. Like, I loved her, but yet she was so difficult. I felt like relieved when I put her to bed early, because that was her consequence, right? They're just the connection, which is so vital and so important, was hindered because I was frustrated and annoyed most of the time that I had this child that never did any of the things I asked her to do. And I felt I took it personally. Like, it seemed like whatever I asked her to do, she didn't do. So I loved her, but we really lacked that connection because I did not know. We did not have any of that training. We didn't know about trauma. We didn't know about children, who maybe were prenatally exposed to alcohol. We didn't know any of that. And when you don't know those things and you're trying to do all the traditional things, you can actually cause more harm than good. The good news is, and we learned that through, because my husband and I had gone on to become empowered to connect parent trainers using Dr. Purvis's trust-based relational intervention. So you can still, like, we're learning now how to connect with our daughter. She's 30. Now she's married. We have, she had a very difficult later years, and through her 20s. She really struggled because I contributed a lot of that to the fact that we didn't know what we were doing. So we didn't know how to really fully support her. We could parent her and provide her with a loving family and a roof over her head and all the things, but that real connection and the real accommodations and understanding her needs, we lacked that, and that made it difficult for our relationship, and it made it difficult for her to navigate adulthood. But we're rebuilding that relationship now and applying some of those things that we learned, saying yes, and just connecting without focusing on, I don't have to like discipline or any of that because she's 30, right? But
Sure.
spending more time just connecting and more loving, fun things goes a long way.
So I wonder if you can like kind of package a nugget for our listeners, because I also am learning so much as you're sharing this, because I think some of us have heard of like fetal alcohol syndrome, but you're saying fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. So can you kind of explain what is in that definition? Like, how would we know, or what happened to a child that might be impacted by that?
Yeah. So thank you for, this is something I've become passionate about talking about. My youngest two boys, who were from our sibling set from Ukraine, who are currently now 16 and 18. They're our youngest two. They're the only two left at home. They were diagnosed very early on with FAS, fetal alcohol syndrome. So they have the facial features that had low birth weight, small head circumference, a lot of the physical things. Plus, in our court documentation from Ukraine, it does say that the parents were alcoholics. So it was relatively easy for us to get a developmental pediatrician to give them a formal diagnosis. So we have that. But aside from that, I knew FAS. But I knew my kids we had much more training, and we had gotten, because we sought it out ourselves, training for trauma, which covered a little bit of the FAS stuff. But really, fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, it is a spectrum, because not every individual presents with the same exact symptoms, characteristics. But because my kids have the facial features, they got the FAS diagnosis, but sometimes, and really only 10% of individuals prenatally exposed to alcohol will have those facial features. That's the flat philtrum, that spot above the upper lip, a thin upper lip. There's something unique about their eyes. There's a lot of there's just different things that now I can see it in a child when when I'm interacting with kids who have been prenatally exposed to alcohol, but that's only 10%, because birth mom would have had to been drinking on a certain 3 days out of the entire pregnancy early on. I think it's like day 19, 20, or 21, something like that. That might not be exact, but it's 3 days early on in the pregnancy. Mom had to be drinking on those 3 days for the facial features to be affected. If not, she could have been not drinking on those 3 days and been drinking on all the other days, but only on those 3 days will the facial features be affected. So most of the time, families do not know what they're dealing with, and it's so either not diagnosed or misdiagnosed. I just read a study where 86% of the children in child welfare have been prenatally exposed to alcohol, and it causes it affects the structure and the function of the brain. So it creates a brain injury. It's an invisible disability, because if they don't have the facial features, you're only going to be clued in on certain other characteristics, which I can list off in a moment. But even if they do have the facial features, the average person isn't going to look at a child or a young person and say, oh, obviously they have FAS or FASD because they look like that. Like, we could easily recognize an individual with Down syndrome. People don't know what to look for in a child, or even an adult who has FASD. So when I took a deep dive into studying and getting some formal training on FASD really over the past 2 years, because when COVID hit, my youngest son, 14-year-old, then he turned 15, really, really struggled. And he has the most impact of FAS. It's very profound in him, and he struggled. And I was trying to figure out, is he struggling because he's a teenager? Is he struggling because of the trauma? Is he struggling because of FAS? And really the answer was yes, it's all of that. But as I really began to learn more about FASD, I realized this is really the overarching thing that's affecting and touching every area of his life and ours. And, families don't know, because it's not routine part of the training for foster parents in the state of Minnesota. It is, and maybe one other state, but by and large, it's not part of the training. And families just don't know. And because professionals don't know, I mean, I've had to go around and advocate for my kids. They have IEPs in school, but FASD or FAS is not recognized, even on a federal level. So on their IEP, it doesn't say FAS, it says other health impaired. But I make sure all the time that, the school system and the doctors and anybody we're working with understands this is FASD. This is what is causing this. And, been really on a mission lately. A lot of my podcasts are all about this, because the more I learned, the more I realized every foster and adoptive parent needs to understand this, because this is probably something they're dealing with. They just don't know.
Yeah, we don't know the underlying things. I feel like you're speaking directly at me, because I'm like, I know that there was some prenatal exposure for my 2 kiddos. And so you had mentioned you could list some of the behaviors that are kind of indicators. Can you share some of that? Because I know some listeners are like, wow, I didn't know this term. This is answering a lot of questions, but how do I know for sure? And then what do I do about that?
Yes. So there's primary symptoms of FASD, would be a developmental level of functioning we call it dysmaturity. So they act immature. Like, we think of it as immature. They act younger than they actually are. And that's not something that they're doing on purpose, but that's just because developmentally, that's where their brain is at. And it can be very hard when you have, like, say, a 16-year-old who really operates more like a 10-year-old on so many levels. And it's even scarier when they're like 18 and maybe driving, but yet in most, emotionally and developmentally and in all other ways, they are like 12, but yet, you're trying to parent, right? So the dysmaturity is a big one. Sensory processing issues, which, a lot of times go hand in hand also with the trauma. Nutrition issues. I know I have a son who is, it's like they're addicted to sugar. Sugar can be a big thing. Language and communication challenges, slow processing pace. If, like, when you have a kiddo who you'll be telling them something and they might, you might ask them something and they'll just, their first answer is always, I don't know. And then after a few minutes, they actually have an answer for you because it's taken them that long to actually come up with the answer. Or for example, I've learned that with my kids, I can't give them a list of things to do because they can't, it's too much information. They can't process through all of that and sort it out. It's one, we give accommodations, which is really what parents need to learn to do. So I give, one direction at a time. And when that direction has been followed through, then I give the next direction. Because if you just, or for example, you may say, and this is more to do with executive functioning, which is also on that list. So executive functioning challenges. If I say, go clean your room, that never gets done, ever. It didn't get done with our daughter when we first brought her home. And forget it. I have teenage boys, which, typically that would never get done anyway. But what it is think about all of the things a brain has to do to clean a room. There's a lot of decisions that have to be made. What are you going to pick up first? How are you going to sort the laundry? Is this clean? Is this dirty? If it's clean, where does it go? Do you put it in a drawer? Do you hang it up? If it's dirty, where do I put it after that? There's garbage to be picked up. Where does, where do these things go? These toys or these, items or whatever. There's so many decisions. And because of executive functioning challenges, they can't make those decisions. So therefore it doesn't. So I have learned my accommodation is this. And because we have teenage boys, especially, I'll just say, okay, bring me all your dirty clothes. Just bring them to me. And they can follow that step. They've done that. Okay, now bring me out your dirty dishes. I have teenagers, so there's always dirty dishes involved. So, so it's like one step at a time. And as each step is complete, then we can, go to the next step. But they also sort of need a co-pilot in the cleaning process to figure out, sorting through what's on the floor and where does it go? And does it, I know a mom who nothing gets hung up and nothing gets put in drawers. They have baskets in the closet for the clean laundry. So that way the kid can just pull out whatever, because deciding, does this get folded? And if I fold it, what drawer does it go into? Or does it get hung up? And, so those are the things that our kids have a really hard time making those decisions. And slow processing pace, executive functioning, learning and memory challenges, abstract thinking is a huge one. Concepts of money, super, super hard. And we saw that in our daughter. Like, she got in big trouble as a young adult with a driver's license and a car, because things like car insurance are, right? Like, what is that even? And so she just didn't pay it for a long time, and then got a vehicle in our state. If your car insurance is lapsed or expired and you don't have it, but yet you have license plates on your car, the motor vehicle fines you every day that you don't have car insurance. Got in like way over her head with significant fines to the motor vehicle, still had to pay the insurance company. And the sad thing is she had the money because she had a job and she had a bank account and she had the money. She just couldn't navigate paying for it, and then got so lost in the whole thing that it just became overwhelming, and she just shut down. And then she didn't want to tell us about it because she didn't want to get in trouble. because she didn't want to get yelled at. Like, and so she just couldn't understand the importance of car insurance because it's not a tangible thing. But money, I have an 18-year-old who just lost money, but he wouldn't open a bank account initially because he said, well, the bank just takes your money. And I'm like, well, yes, but they keep it safe for you. And you can take it out anytime you want to, but if you lose your debit card, we can cancel it and your money's not gone. But if you lose a wallet full of cash, it's gone. So, but it's that concept of understanding that and managing time. They have a really hard time with that. So those are really some of the, primary, we call them symptoms of FASD. And so we do a lot of accommodations, help, like I gave the examples of with cleaning the room, helping with cleaning the room, one step instructions, extra time to do things, things like that. So there's accommodations could be a number of things. Like we just got a puppy for our son that we're training to be an emotional support dog. That's really an accommodation. That's something that he is going to need to be successful. I just wrote a blog post about our son and how my husband taught him to mow the lawn over the summer because we have a riding lawnmower. And what teenage boy wouldn't want to make a few bucks and drive around a riding lawnmower? But our son was overwhelmed with that because we have a big yard. We live out in the country. So there was a lot of decisions to be made. Where do you mow first? How much do you mow? How long do you mow for? How do you navigate around the trees? Then there's the loud sound of the lawnmower, which is a sensory processing thing, and the vibration of the lawnmower, and all of those things. So we actually broke it down into small steps, and my husband went out with him, showed him gave him earplugs, and then showed him one small section of the lawn, let him just mow that and then take a break and then come out and then mow another small section. And they kind of followed a pattern. And then each time over the summer that my husband wanted him to mow, he went out with him and showed him, and they followed the same pattern until it became a habit and he could understand the pattern, and he would just follow the pattern after that. But we couldn't just say, go mow the lawn. Couldn't just go mow the lawn. So that was an accommodation. Yeah. But if the thing is if our kids aren't supported well, if they're not understood, if we're not making those accommodations, trying to fit the square peg in the round hole, and they start feeling overwhelmed and stressed out, it leads to secondary symptoms, which are, they become easily fatigued, anxious, fearful. They can self-isolate. They can get overwhelmed. They can become argumentative. They can suffer from depression, frustration, anger, poor self-esteem, have family relationship problems, trouble in school, and all of that. We see those secondary symptoms when a kid isn't well supported, when not only parents, but also school teachers and other caregivers are not educated in this and aren't aware, because then the children aren't being accommodated well and supported well. And they can be successful because they have wonderful strengths and gifts and talents, but then they have these challenges and they just need help and support. And if they don't get, if it continues, and even with the secondary symptoms, they don't get the help that they need, then tertiary symptoms can develop, and kids can end up in trouble with the law. There's, I just saw a statistic not too long ago that the average age an individual with an FASD gets into trouble with the criminal justice system is 12 years old.
Wow.
And then alcohol and drug usage or addiction problems, problems with the legal system, suicide, things like that, if they just continue down that path where they're not well supported.
So I feel like for some listeners that may already have their toe in the foster or adoptive world might say, okay, that was so helpful. I can really relate to that. But then I think there's another kind of listener who's going, I was thinking about it, but now I'm thinking I'm going to go in reverse, right? So I wonder, Sandra, as we wrap up, how would you address someone that's so new to this space? And I know a couple families that are going through the licensing process right now, and they're seeing profiles and they're like, I can't do that. That feels so overwhelming. And even in your situation, you didn't really get to know all these different behaviors until much later as your kids age. So what encouragement can you offer to people that are thinking, okay, that's great, Sandra, that you just told me about fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, but whoa, I don't know if I can do that. What would you say?
Yeah, I would say yes, you can, but you need to become FASD informed and educated. And I've been parenting these kids for an awfully long time. Our oldest daughter now is 30 years old, right down to where, our youngest two at home are 16 and 18. And what I have found really in the past, after doing this for so many years, it's the past 2 years that I have finally learned about this enough and understood it enough. Like, trauma training is vital, as well as, and especially so, I believe now, is the FASD training. And there's not a lot of it out there, but there is some good stuff out there.
Where would
And
you direct this, Sandra, for people that are like, so where do I go? How do I become informed?
yes. So there are some great podcasts and books and websites for training. On my website, justicefororphansny.org, there is a resource page that you can click on, and I've got links to all of them that are my favorite. But I listen to FASD specific podcasts, FASD Hope, FASD Success, and FASD Family Life are three of my favorite podcasts. I listen to them every week. And then there's, the first book you should get is Trying Differently Rather Than Harder by Diane Melvin. It's a small book, but it really sets the stage for FASD and for a better understanding of that. And then there are training. I just participated in an online 6-week training through Facets. Again, links to all of are on my website. I talk about FASD a lot on my podcast because I believe every foster and adoptive parent, perspective or, veteran, we need to know and understand this so we can better advocate for our kids, because I have found that I need to be informed so I can advocate for them, and also inform teachers and inform doctors and other professionals, because they don't necessarily know either. I just interviewed a doctor on my podcast who runs an FASD clinic in my state, and she said in medical school she read a paragraph about FAS. That's it.
Wow.
Like, they're not, and then they're relying on archaic diagnostics like facial features, when that's not, it's 10% of the kids. So becoming FASD informed as well as trauma informed is vital to their success. And I look at my kids and especially my youngest two boys, hard, we have some hard things, but I also know that the future they would have faced had we not adopted them, it would have been a nightmare for them. So as hard as some of the days are for us, it's worth it. It is so worth it because they have strengths. One of mine he's a welder, and right now he's off at our volunteer fire company because he's become a volunteer firefighter. And our other son is still home. I'm homeschooling him now because he really struggled in school with all the COVID changes. He's going to be 16, and he loves the Lord. In fact, he just made a little cameo appearance on an upcoming podcast episode for Orphans No More. And I wasn't like, I'm not sure how this is going to go, but he was a rock star. He did so well. And when I asked him, what would you like parents to know? What would you like our listeners to know? And he was like, pray for the kids, pray for me, pray for the kids. All the kids need prayer. So I'm like, wow. So, if God calls you to it, he will equip you for it. And even if you have kids with a developmental disability or, whatever it may be, God has called you to that. He'll equip you for it. And you're listening to this podcast right now. The Lord may be starting that equipping process so that you know about it. So there's some great resources out there, but continue. I mean, I'm how many years in, to this, as a parent, 20 years in as an adoptive parent, and I'm still learning, and it's vital.
It's vital. And it's vital because you're sharing. And I think that's such a gift. You being on the podcast is a gift, people listening and sharing the podcast. And to Sandra's point, like, the more that we can share the things we know with others, the more others can be aware and informed, whether it's what the need for adoption is, or how these different traumas are impacting kiddos and how to accommodate. So, Sandra, this has been so informative, and I am so grateful that you have such experience in this field, both from like doing it as a mom, but also trying to teach others how to do it as well. And then now with your research and everything too. So thank you for sharing all of the things that you did. And I think we're all more informed, and we might feel a little overwhelmed. And I think that's okay and healthy. But I think because we know now, we can look at the world a little differently. So I really appreciate you coming and sharing.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be on your show, Marcy. Thanks so much.
It's been so fun.
Yeah.
As a listener of the Forgotten Adoption Option podcast, you are helping raise awareness about foster care adoption and the 120,000 children who are waiting for a forever family. You can also help raise awareness by leaving a review, subscribing, sharing, talking about, and liking this podcast. If you'd like more information on adopting a child or sibling set through the foster care system, visit my website, ForgottenAdoptionOption.com. There you will find out how to get started, and you can even order a copy of my book, The Forgotten Adoption Option, which will guide you through the entire process, and it is available in paperback, audio, and ebook. I welcome you to reach out with questions, comments, and your own story. I would love to hear if you're signing up for training or where you are in the adoption process. You can connect with me on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Just search for Marcy Bursack. Thank you for tuning in, caring, and sharing, because every child deserves a family.